Welcome to Troubadour Talks. Today I have Ann Ciccolella on the show, and we are going to talk about Macbeth by Shakespeare. Now, Ann is the artistic director of the Austin Shakespeare. Is it company or organization? How do you?
We just say Austin Shakespeare.
Austin Shakespeare. Okay, of Austin Shakespeare. And I imagine, you've put on Macbeth before?
Yes.
Okay, so you've put on Macbeth, so it's a perfect person to talk to. I'm very excited to get into this play. One of the things that I talk to people about, and what the spirit of the show is not only to educate and to teach people about the show, to show its relevance to our own time and to our own lives, but also to try to get people a little bit excited about what they can get out of it. Even though Shakespeare, I probably already lost people this moment it said Shakespeare. And I'll be honest, I sometimes was, I've been afraid of Shakespeare. And so that's what I'm hoping we can talk about, is why it's okay to be afraid of him, but still give it a shot and things of that nature. But before we hop into what Macbeth is about, I want to talk a little bit about you, Anne. And obviously, like I said, you're the artistic director of Austin Shakespeare, but you have a lot of other projects that you're working on. So I wanted to talk about at least one or two other ones that are exciting before we get into Macbeth. So what are you working on at the moment, Anne, besides Austin Shakespeare? Especially with COVID, I know that's been a challenge with theater.
Sure. Well, we also have a young Shakespeare company, so we're auditioning teens to do Much Ado About Nothing.
Oh, okay.
Really, delightful Shakespeare play, and it's not so difficult. And of course, a lot of people know the Kenneth Branagh movie, which is like ice cream to watch. It's really easy to watch.
I have seen that. I love that. Yeah, that was wonderful. That's when, this is how daft I am. That's when I had read Much Ado About Nothing in college, didn't understand a word of it, I think, at that time. I saw that movie, and then I was watching with friends for a movie club, and I was like, oh, they're making Much Ado About Nothing. I finally got that's how dense I can be sometimes. So people who are out there who are like that, it's okay. It happens to all of us, or at least to me. But anyway, So Much Ado About Nothing for kids.
Absolutely. There are teens, and they actually perform it. And in Austin, Texas, we have a replica of an Elizabethan theater. So it's outdoors, and we're hoping that by July, people will feel comfortable doing the outdoor audience.
Yeah.
So we'll be doing that. And if they go to austinshakespeare.org, they can learn more about that if they're in the Austin area. We still do stuff on Zoom, and probably will continue to do stuff on Zoom. But as you know, I'm also into Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
So I have a group on Meetup called Objectivists, which is the name of Ayn Rand's philosophy in Austin. And we also have a subgroup called Ayn Rand Curious.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to be, an egghead about Ayn Rand. If you're just sort of curious, we have Philosophy Who Needs It, which is sort of an introductory essay that she wrote, because I really think philosophy and ideas is the core of understanding. So we'll be doing that soon. So we encourage people to check all those things out.
Check out Ayn Rand Curious. Yeah, when I was in college, I would put on something. So I was a campus club leader, and I would put on every, semester or whatever, I'd put on one special event where we'd come in, listen to Philosophy Who Needs It, whether you liked Ayn Rand, hated her, whatever, just hear, at least for your own sake, just learn a little bit about what she said rather than what people say she said, and, talk about that. And that's what we did. And that was one of the more successful things I did, because that speech is really powerful, whether or not
it's
you like
30 minutes long.
Yeah.
And if you go to the Ayn Rand campus, it has a lot of video attached, and language and images and so on. But, ironically, when we do a Shakespeare play or any play that we do, we have what's called a talk back. So we do the whole thing, and then afterwards, anybody who wants to stay in the audience to just ask questions, make comments, and so on. So we get that interaction, and it's just fun to exchange ideas.
Yeah, I think that, and it's one of the things that I think is, so there's an exchange of ideas, but now maybe going into Macbeth a little bit. And before we give an overview of the play and what the plot or the story is about, I wanted to actually ask you about spoilers. So I, on this show and with Literary Canon Club, have over and over again stated that in many cases, not all, but especially with classic literature, I am pro spoiler for a variety of reasons. So for instance, with the Literary Canon Club, we're doing the Iliad, I told them everything about the Trojan War, everything that the major events of the, of the Iliad that's different than the Trojan War. And I do this with other stories as well. And for me, the rule is essentially, one, does it sufficiently help the reader to access this play or this story? Whereas there may be such a barrier that they're not sufficiently inspired to continue reading from just the plot, right? Because it's harder. It's not like, what we're used to with the movie or where everything's kind of told to us, without our imaginations, for instance. It's just shown to us. And then is it the type of story that the plot isn't the fundamental reason to watch that? That's not to say plot isn't important, but just as an example, Shakespeare himself gives one of the most famous spoilers of all time at the beginning of Romeo and Juliet, right? He comes out and says, these dudes are going to die. And it's like, wait a second, what? And so, star-crossed lovers and this and that, and then they die. And it's all told at the beginning. And for me, that's always like, there is a plot. The plot is important, but he digs a little bit deeper. It's, words and poetry is also very important. So for me, that's like my thoughts on spoilers. I don't know about your thoughts on spoilers.
Sure. I totally get your point. I mean, for Shakespeare, if you have the tragedy of Hamlet, the tragedy of Othello, the tragedy of Macbeth, you can figure out pretty quickly those people are going to be dead.
It's a tragedy. Yeah.
But it's how it happens. I know that you've done some work on a Greek tragedy. And in that, everybody in the audience, thousands of people came and they knew the story. But how Sophocles told the story, or Euripides or Aeschylus told it, what was their take on it? And as you've said before on your show, Kurt, we have movies about Batman and all sorts of things that people know the basic idea, but it's how it happens that makes it interesting.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of good literature, that there are things that can spoil it that I avoid. So for instance, I think, especially with more modern stuff, like even Ayn Rand, I would not say exactly what happened at the very end of We the Living when I talked about it, or the very end even of The Fountainhead, or the very end. I do think there is, in cases like that, there is a kind of buildup, and the ending is powerful, and there is a kind of, she's really good with mystery and, the kind of tying you in. And when something relies heavily on mystery, I do tend to say, okay, that's a big part of the experience, so I don't want to ruin that. But a lot of stories, I think, great stories do not necessarily rely on it. So and so it seems like we're kind of on the same page, and that's the kind of build up to say we're going to probably spoil Macbeth. So if you haven't, the tragedy of Macbeth. So if you haven't read it, maybe we'll try to leave out the very end scene, but I think we still need to talk about that ending. I don't know. So we'll see how it goes. But why don't we give a brief overview of the whole story?
I guess one thing I want to do, though, is what you said is underscore this with Shakespeare. It's perfectly fine to read a summary of Shakespeare. Sometimes you go on YouTube and they have sort of the finger puppet Shakespeare characters and they tell you the whole thing in 2 or 3 minutes. I find that helpful. Oh, yeah. It's like if you're going to an opera, even if they have, now they have super titles. I think it's great to know the story before, because you can sort of hang your hat on it. So there's no shame in knowing the summary of the story, for sure. Yeah.
And so another thing I want to talk to you about, but I do want to give people the summary, because I know that's something that they like as well, like you're saying. But and then we can jump. But one thing, especially with you, is one of the challenges is getting people, who aren't necessarily consider themselves literary people. Like I think of engineers, doctors, tech people, brilliant humans who need Shakespeare, and I think as much or more than I do, they need to have that experience and experience the inner world and the pleasures of the inner world that is resplendent in reading something and experiencing something like Shakespeare. but there's a barrier. There seems to be so many barriers. And one of your challenges, my challenges, like the thing that we do is try to break through those barriers, get people interested in the work. And so I don't know if you had, but maybe before we do the Macbeth, since we're talking about this, do you have any tips for people who are like, I should do a little, like I should do a little bit of Shakespeare, but I don't know. I don't want to do it. It's too hard. I don't understand a word they're saying on that stage. So let me just go watch, Batman versus Superman or Justice League.
Yeah. Godzilla.
Godzilla.
I would say the should is part of the barrier. So in the should that you feel, just explore a little deeper. What do I want to get out of it? I want to feel more creative. I want to use my imagination more. When I have hard problems at work, I want to think outside the box. And I think that there is enjoyment, and I think it's perfectly fine to watch a YouTube video of Macbeth. You could have the script near you if you wanted to look at the script. And I think that's exciting and fun, and there's lots of good stuff on YouTube and other media in terms of Macbeth and all the Shakespeare plays. So have fun with it rather than kind of getting into the should.
Yes, thank you for it's good for people to hear from someone else, because I've said similar things, that if you have that blockage, it's going to be a problem. And it's okay to kind of get some advice, to have some summaries. There's a lot of stuff online now, including this show. So it's okay to watch the show, get something out of it, and learn about Macbeth, and then go watch a Macbeth. And one of the things, I'll save this for a second about adaptation. So let's talk about what Macbeth is about now. Let's get into that.
Sure.
Okay.
Well,
so
go ahead. We start with the witches, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you key off what they say, you get the whole theme of the play. So they say fair is foul and foul is fair.
Yeah.
So what you think is good is bad. What you think is bad is good. Everything, contradictions exist.
Mm-hmm. And maybe even the opposite. Foul can be fair things too, right?
Yeah.
So what? Yeah.
Yes. So they're setting you up. But go ahead. I'll let you say a little bit of your thoughts about the beginning of Macbeth.
Well, just so what I like to do is like the overview of the plot, and then we can look at it, overall. But just so people understand Macbeth, who've maybe heard it and don't understand everything. So Macbeth, and help me with this if you don't mind. So Macbeth is written. It's by Shakespeare, written early 1600s, right after the death of Elizabeth, and it's about I think 11th century king Macbeth and his coming to power. And what's that? Of Scotland. Thank you. Yeah, Scottish play. And so basically, it's like you said, it starts with these witches that portend his future becoming a king, and then the story
right to his face. They say it right to his face.
Yeah,
you're gonna go up a notch, and then up a notch, and then up a notch. So
yeah,
go ahead.
And then so then he goes home to his wife, who kind of together they figure out that they're going to assassinate the king who's coming to their house.
And that's our idea. He's just like, well, this is going to happen, and she's like, honey, we're going to make it happen.
Yeah. So I definitely want to talk about Lady Macbeth's role. But yeah, like, because I've always thought of it as like, well, maybe there's like a good symbiosis. Like some people blame it on her, and I don't quite see it that way. It's like they're definitely compatriots. But yeah, so they eventually kill the king. The king's son runs away. They then basically Macbeth starts getting crazier and crazier, and he starts getting, like a tyrant, starts killing everybody around him. He becomes afraid of everything, or not, maybe fear isn't the right word, but he starts.
The right word.
Okay, and then he kills even his friend, and we could talk about Banquo. And then eventually he gets another portent or another vision from the three witches, another omen, and he follows them to the letter. He gets a lot of confidence, and this leads him right to the destruction by Malcolm, who's the son of Duncan, who was murdered, and then he's usurped. And that's I think the essence of the plot, right? Those are the major events. Now, of course, there's a lot that goes on in that. So starting at the beginning, like Ann was talking about with the witches, and foul is fair, fair is foul. And then, of course, what is Macbeth's entering line when he comes? The first line he says is, I don't have it memorized.
I have not seen.
Yeah, thank you. You've had it memorized. Yeah, I have not seen. And he's coming in from a war, a rebellion against Duncan, and he is a loyal, it seems, general. And but again, maybe this goes to the fair is foul, foul is fair. So when he meets Duncan, so I didn't get this my first reading with it, and this is why reading this story and watching multiple adaptations really helps, and it's such an enjoyable experience. Like it's a story. These are stories that can be re-experienced over and over and over and over again, and you can get like I got joy out of seeing Sir Patrick Stewart, thank you. Sir Patrick Stewart's performance versus Fassbender's, Michael Fassbender or something, the most recent one. And they're very different, and it's really enjoyable to see how they, portrayed Macbeth and how the ladies portrayed Macbeth. So, let
me inject. I want to inject this. There's lots of critics, writers write about this play that I agree with, who think Macbeth is a fabulous soldier. He is ruthless on the battlefield. He's violent on the battlefield. In that first scene, we hear that he cut someone from the nave to the chops.
Yeah.
From the navel to your chops. So he cut him right there. So that's really good when you're at war. However, when you're at home, and you're in the domestic setting, you're not supposed to kill the king.
Yeah.
So the thought is he kind of is a hero in the wrong place. Mm-hmm. So he's a hero on the battlefield, but in the house, you don't want to have that brutality. And of course, he goes to Mcduff's house and has his wife and children killed as well. So I just want to say, for me, Macbeth does have heroic qualities, and he has them till the very end. So we'll talk about that final battle when Macbeth and Macduff fight, because I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, it's very well. Let's see if I remember this. Like, blow wind, come wrath. At least we'll die with our harness on our back, or something like that. Or rack, come rack. That's blow wind, come rack. At least we'll die with our harness on our back. And that is at the end. And that stuck out to me. And partly because of Patrick Stewart's delivery, but it's just such a wonderful. He is that brave hero. Like, it's admirable in a way. It's a weird but he's a tyrant.
If I know I'm gonna die, I'm gonna fight like hell.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a trait about him. Blow wind, come rack. At least we'll die. We'll die with our harness on our back. Like, no matter what, they're gonna come what may. He's gonna die with fighting. That's admirable, but he is a tyrant and he's evil, and we've seen the evil that is in him now, at least. And we could talk about like how he became that way, or if he was always that way. I think that's one of the questions of the story. But yeah, like you're saying, I think it's something we maybe don't see as much anymore, of these truly admirable, heroic figures. And that's what tragedy has always been about. It's been about those types of figures like Macbeth. So, when you're watching this story unfold, or you're reading it, you have to imagine, how do you portray him? So like, here's one thing I was curious about you as a director and how you make this decision. And if you have nuances, is how evil and certain do you make him at the beginning? Right. Or is he, so like I took Stewart's performance, as an example, as he was somewhat uncertain and shaken by the war. Right. So he comes out of this battlement and it's smoke, and it's basically, this is a modern, but they're using Shakespearean language, but it's like, modern times, basically. Like, what's that?
Modern setting.
Yeah. Modern setting. Thank you. And, so anyway, to me, he felt very uncertain until a certain moments, events occurred. And then he becomes very like certain of himself. Right. And then he kind of dwindles into chaos to some degree. But how do you, as a director, make that decision, with your actor? And then do you have nuances to kind of shake it up and make it a little interesting, so it's not always the same performance over and over again.
Sure. Well, Shakespeare's the one who makes it interesting, right? So
Yeah, good point.
you can interpret the words. And one thing I want to say to our audience is you don't have to know what every word means. When we just went over those lines, they have a sound to them. They have a context to them. So don't worry that there are words that you know and words that you don't know. Just, experience it. Take the ride, if you will. And it is interesting. I mean, what Shakespeare does is Macbeth is a little unsure at the beginning. Lady Macbeth is more sure. And then it reverses, right?
Yeah.
He becomes more sure as she starts to descend into madness. I mean, she says to him, this will make you mad. And the truth is, Shakespeare loves irony and twists, antithesis and so on. So she actually goes mad. And that's, Lady Macbeth's mad scene in terms of the spots of blood on her hands are late in the play. So I think to answer your question directly, the more actors can show the vulnerability of the character, the more the audience is interested. Because if the character doesn't know what they're going to do, the audience is going to be like, oh, what are they going to do? The more sure that the actor is, the sort of less it's like, yeah. I mean, as audiences, we are the smartest audiences that ever lived. I mean, we've seen hundreds of thousands of plots.
Oh, good point.
We know plots.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Especially if you're writing a contemporary play, audience is 10 steps ahead of you.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right? So with Shakespeare, it's more this sort of how it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting. And I guess I didn't think about that we are very smart as, just because we're so trained, we consume more entertainment than anybody in history by far. Even the stupid, simple plots that we get sometimes is still a plot. When Shakespeare's putting this on, most of those peasants spent all of their time tilling the land, and maybe they'd have a penny to go to the Globe Theater, but that's about it, right? Most of the people in the pit, right?
Yeah.
So that's a really good point. Even the people in the rich, the royalty, even they weren't inundated as much as we are with literature and stories and, even, the music and just all that. That's a really good point. So everybody is very tuned to okay, so this is going to happen. And we don't even think about it consciously, but we kind of already know, I guess one example I've thought of in the past is, it's really hard, murder mystery writers. I feel really bad for them because I know everything about, oh, wait a second, but he touched that doorknob. That guy's out, right? He did this. I know all about forensics, how do I know that? It's because I've watched so many stories. So that's a really good way of thinking about the savviness of modern audiences. And so I guess another thing, if I can point out the fun that I think is fun, and I think you guys as audience members will think this is fun eventually. It may not feel this way the moment, the second you open up Shakespeare, maybe it will. But I really found it fun to kind of look at Fassbender and Stewart's performances. Fassbender, it's I was able to see things that most people weren't able to see because I've read it, I've thought about it a little bit, and I've seen performances. So so what do you think about this? I don't know if you've seen these, but Fassbender to me was more menacing right from the beginning. And Stewart's, which I liked Stewart's more because he was, like you said, more vulnerable. He seemed very vulnerable at the beginning. Even, him having a shaved head and he's a little bit smaller than some of the Fassbender, they actually show him as a warrior, killing people. They don't show that in the other one. And of course we know, like you said, from Knave to Chop. But anyway, so I just thought that was interesting, looking at different performances as a way to experience it.
Why you go to the theater, right? Because every time you go, it's going to be a little different.
Exactly.
Even if you see the same production with the same actors, you go on Thursday night. If you go 3 months later and they're still performing, it's going to be a little different depending on the audience's reactions and so on. So that's part of the joy of theater, is that sort of interpretation.
Yes. But people, just so you audience member, just so you know, that's why you have to, one, try theater, but also really experience the words. of Shakespeare and really like try to just, you're not going to understand everything. He's very figurative. He's got a lot of symbolic language sometimes. And there are words that are 500 years old that we don't use in the same way. So Anne, do you update a lot of those types of words or, like
if they're really obscure, okay, I occasionally will substitute a contemporary word if it's in the correct rhythm, because Shakespeare is writing in a poetic rhythm, right? He's got 10 beats per line, mostly da-dum, 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 da-dum. He's got a rhythm going. So you also want to think about that if you want to try to do a substitution. Honestly, sometimes I get rid of the thous and the arts and that even that level of language just because it sounds to people like the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think whatever we can do to make him closer to us, the better. But you don't want to lose that poetry.
Yeah. So how do you stage the weird sisters? You talked about that earlier, or the witches. And that seems to be a problem for a couple reasons that says something about the plot. But I just thought I'd ask you, how do you think about staging that? The three witches that are very early on in the play. Not the first thing. They're not the first thing, are they? First thing is the injured. Isn't the first thing the injured person? Okay, the first thing are the witches.
It goes back and
forth.
Like
okay.
It's got some short scenes in the beginning.
Okay, that's right. So how do you think about that?
I think they should be ambiguous in the sense of, are they just ladies that he meets, or are they really supernatural figures? And the truth is, as you get into the play, it does get very supernatural, because they show him visions of the future. Well, I don't think that's just in Macbeth's head. So I like for it to be something that the audience interprets. Mm-hmm. I've seen a lot of interpretations of, old crone ladies or homeless women or, all sorts of interpretations. But I also like to get the best actors I can. Some people actually have a guy in there. I usually just have 3 women, but sometimes because by your beards, there's a by your beards in there. So some people say, oh, one of the witches had a beard or something. So I like to put it to the audience's interpretation, but they want to be intriguing, right?
Yeah.
They want to draw you in.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the questions when I first read this, and I think I have a different view now, but is, are they real? Is one thing, or are they? Now, when I read it again, I was like, well, hold on, but Banquo sees them as well. So, so both see.
Shakespeare does that right at the beginning, right?
Right at the beginning. Yeah. So we know that they are at least real. Banquo hears what they say. Mm-hmm. So they say something. Now, I think you can maybe do later on when he sees them again, or they bring to life these things. Maybe that is something, that he's conjuring up this image from his past or something. I don't know if you could,
maybe they're just voices or something. Kirk, you could direct the play and just have voices later in the play so that they're in his head. Now, I will say, because Kirk, I know that you're a bit of an egghead, but King James is who this is being written for.
Mm-hmm.
King James is Scottish, and he wrote a book on witchcraft.
Got it. Yeah.
So Shakespeare is like, hey, he's going to really like this. It's going to really be great. And we also think that this play was not done outdoors, but that it was done indoors, and that the play was done by candlelight. And as the play goes on, it gets darker and darker and darker, because the thought is the candles were getting lower and lower and lower and sort of running out. So there's lots of sort of interesting side historical things.
Well, I do recommend to people, especially with older, classic literature, that it does help to learn at least the basics of the history behind it. Sometimes, you don't have to read a whole book on it, but it's helpful. It was helpful for me to know that there was the gunpowder plot right before this, like the year before this play. And I think there was the question also of succession that's going on, where because he was, Elizabeth didn't, the Queen Elizabeth didn't have kids. And so we just have this person who comes on. So there's this question. And so when you're reading this play, you're experiencing it, and going to what you're saying also about the way he staged it indoors and with King James and everything, I read, and I don't know if you think this is true, from one scholar that the mirror that one of the Banquo kids, the ghost that he so just so everybody understands, toward the end of Macbeth, Macbeth has killed his best friend Banquo because he's afraid Banquo. There was a prophecy about Banquo's kids being king. And so Macbeth is like, well, this is a problem for me because I'm king and they're going to have to kill me to become king, just like I killed Duncan and so on and so forth. This is the problem. Tyranny, right? Of tyrants. And anyway, so there's a scene where at the end, all these ghosts of the kid, that Fleance, I believe his name is, of Banquo's child. Banquo's now dead. Fleance ran away and he sees like generation after generation. And the last one, the eighth one, carries a mirror. And some scholars believe that mirror would be held up to King James, that first performance.
Because Banquo is an ancestor of James.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, you're really cool. You're good. So yeah.
Yeah, like you're a part of this. And when I read that, it really made me think of I think we underestimate what literature and poetry and drama and stories do in our culture to glue us together and to make our society work in a sense. The stories that we tell, we've heard this, but it's very similar to like what Virgil did with the Aeneid, and how, it's this whole story that kind of leads up to the current Caesar, who just left, just finished after Julius Caesar was killed. This is Augustus. And, basically the Aeneid leads up to an illusion that it all leads, to the god king Augustus, essentially. And it's kind of giving credence or credibility to that reign. And I think there's something similar going on with Macbeth in Shakespeare, which I just thought is a very interesting thing about how it kind of makes us, and of course we're not King James necessarily, but I do think there's a similarity or, something there about tying us all together. So.
And it's just, we're in the COVID world, so we're dying to gather. And that's a big thing about theater, right? It's people coming together, and that you experience that in the theater, when you hear the whole audience gasp at once, or you hear the whole audience laugh at once. That's a real connection between that circuit of energy between the actors on stage and the audience, and it'll be back. It'll be back.
Oh yeah, I don't think theater will ever go away. And it's an important, I think it's an important experience, and Shakespeare will make it more enjoyable if you just do a few little things. I tell people just pay attention to the words. That's a line from Hamlet. What are you reading, Hamlet? Words. So pay attention to the words. And you have to use your own imagination in the plays a little bit. And so that's part of the joy of the play. Okay, so Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Who's the villain? Who's the culprit? And I think some people say that Lady Macbeth, pushes Macbeth into this. And, because she asked him, are you a man? Didn't you make a promise to me? I would, if I had a babe, I don't know the line exactly, but if I had a babe, I would, pop out the babe's gumless, or
dash its brains.
And dash its brains. Yeah.
If I swore what you swore.
Yeah. Like you swore you'd kill the king and now you're going back. So he was hesitating and then she did it. And I'll just say the last thing is, that I found interesting is when she's introduced in the play, she's reading a letter from Macbeth, her husband.
Yeah.
And one of the first things she says is she fears his nature. Mm-hmm. Right? She fears that his nature.
That's human kindness.
Kindness. Yeah. And that fear kind of comes to bite her in the butt, I think, later a little bit. But what do you think? Who do you think is at fault? Are they both together? Is there one more than the other? What's your take?
Well, honestly, she can't kill him because when she sees him, she says, he looked too like my father. So I couldn't do it. So he does.
You mean the king? She couldn't do. Yeah.
So after Macbeth kills him, then he comes back with these knives, and we could segue into our little. We had a couple of actors read some lines for us because I wanted the audience to sort of look at the text and see how voices can bring them to life. But in fact, Macbeth kind of freaks out, right? He does it, and then he comes down, and she's like, "Why did you take the knives?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have blood all over you, idiot." So I think they're both culpable, but
Okay.
in a way, she is more punished because she does descend into madness. I mean,
Yeah.
she's really punished.
She definitely descends into madness. Okay, so do you want to set up the scene and then talk about it, or
Sure, sure.
okay,
Well, it's essentially what we just said. So
okay,
in these words we're going to hear, Macbeth has just come out down in the castle. So he walked downstairs. And what I wanted your viewers to look at is the way the language lays on the page.
mhm,
So if you're watching this and not just listening to it, you can see there's sort of a stair step of words where Shakespeare is sharing a verse line. So there
mm,
might be 10 syllables, but Macbeth has 4 syllables, Lady Macbeth has 6. So let's just hear our
interesting.
actors
And who is?
doing just,
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
who is Donalbain? So people know because that's mentioned
So
once.
Donalbain is one of the sons of Duncan.
Okay,
So there are sons in the next room.
yeah. Macbeth is walking in at the beginning of the scene. Just this is two actors from Austin Shakespeare, or just two professional
Yeah,
actors you work with,
yeah.
who have been nice enough to send in a recording. So I'm going to play this recording, and he walks in. Just imagine him carrying these two bloody daggers or knives, and he has just killed the king. The king. He just killed the king, which is kind of a big deal to kill the king. That's kind of a big deal to kill anybody, but to kill the king at this time was a big deal. Okay, so I'm going to pop this on screen. Give me 1 second. People make sure they can see that. Okay, let's.
I have done the deed. Did you not hear a noise?
I heard the owl scream and the crickets cry. Did not you speak?
When?
Now.
As I descended.
I.
Hark! Who lies in the second chamber?
Donalbain.
This is a sorry sight.
Oh, foolish thought, to say a sorry sight.
This one did laugh in his sleep, and one cried murder, that they did wake each other. I stood and heard them, but they did say their prayers and addressed them again to sleep.
There are two lodged together.
One cried, God bless us, and amen. The other, as they had seen me with these hangman's hands. Listening their fear, I could not say amen when they did say, God bless us.
Consider it not so deeply.
But wherefore could not I pronounce amen? I had most need of blessing, and amen stuck in my throat.
These deeds must not be thought after these ways, so it will make us mad.
Methought I heard a voice cry, sleep no more. Macbeth doth murder sleep. The innocent sleep, sleep that knits up the ravelled sleeve of care.
What do you mean?
Still it cried, sleep no more to all the house. Glamis hath murdered sleep, and therefore Calder shall sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more.
Who was it that thus cried? I worthy fain you to unbend your noble strength to think so brain-sickly of things. Go, get some water and wash this filthy witness from your hand. Why did you bring the daggers from the place? They must lie there. Go, carry them, and smear the sleepy grooms with blood.
I'll go no more. I'm afraid to think what I have done. Look on it again, I dare not.
Infernal purpose. Give me the daggers. The sleeping and the dead are but as pictures. 'Tis the eye of childhood that fears a painted devil. If he do bleed, I'll gild the faces of the grooms withal, for it must seem their guilt.
Okay, we're back. Interesting. So that was amazing. They did a wonderful job. So that scene is okay. There's a couple of things. One, I think it's really useful in that to think about if you're just reading Shakespeare, which I do recommend. Like if you're going to go see a play of Macbeth, you read that there's something going on, and I want to go see it. I do recommend people go buy Macbeth, just read through it, because it, like Ann was saying earlier, it helps. But when you're reading through it and listening to this, it helps to think sometimes about how it might be staged. And so maybe this, so I want to talk about this scene, but I think that's a helpful thing, because there's a moment when she says, why did you bring the daggers? One of the, it kind of is weird if you're just reading it. Like, why is she saying that out of nowhere? But if she's like looking over here and then she doesn't notice that he has these bloodstained daggers or so, like it's in the dark and then he like lifts them up crazily. There's a lot of ways you could do that. And I think it's helpful to kind of think about when you're reading it that a lot of the language in Shakespeare in particular is relating to what's going on, because they just had a pretty barren stage in Shakespeare's time. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that. We could talk about that scene.
Shakespeare thought the stage was in your imagination.
Yes.
So you didn't need a lot of sets or even costumes, right? They wore what were the clothes of their own period. You know, when they did Julius Caesar, they had on doublet and hose and they put a little shawl on and said, okay, I'm Roman. So that's happening in your imagination. And what I think is great about reading a play is you can have it just the way you want it.
Yeah.
So whatever actors you want, you could imagine. Whatever setting you want, you could imagine. And that's something that's a little sophisticated sort of down the line as you're reading it. But the truth is it only takes a couple of hours to even read a Shakespeare play.
Oh, yeah. This is the shortest one.
And Macbeth, as you say, is the shortest one. So I think it's also, I would suggest if you want to actually read it yourself, is to get a version that has the glossary on the facing page. So some Folger, I think Signet has that, so that on one page is the Shakespeare text, but on the left-hand side of the page are the footnotes and sometimes some drawings. Now, I also say don't, unless you're really interested in a footnote, note it, but just keep reading. Like when you're reading anything with footnotes, just keep reading. But I think it's perfectly fine to look up a synopsis online or to watch some YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my recommendation again is for people who are, again, if you don't consider yourself a literary person, to really like choose a Shakespeare play every once in a while and just dig into it. If you have a family, this is a great experience to have with your whole family, where you read the plays by yourself, you talk about them, maybe you act part of it out, and then you watch different versions as just an enjoyable. And again, it's just enjoyable as the more you dig into it, and then more and more of it will reveal itself, will bubble itself, to the surface.
Oh, you'll find yourself bringing, lines up at dinner or words up. I mean, it will start to permeate your life, and it's going to stimulate your imagination for sure.
Yeah, stimulate it. And, like Ann is saying, I just can't push this enough, that you also have to do a little bit of work with the imagination that sometimes takes a little training or effort, I should say, not training, effort. So you do have to do some effort. The line from Shakespeare from, I think it's Henry V. I think that's where it's come from. He says, let us on our imaginary forces work. This comes from the prelude.
That's right. The prologue.
Or the prologue, yeah. Because he said, there's this great little line where he says, oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. And I think what he's saying there, which is very indicative to how to read great literature, and especially Shakespeare, is that he wishes sometimes that, this imaginative world could be reality, but it's not, it doesn't fall. But, let us on our imaginary forces work. And that's how I read that line. And I think that's really telling for Shakespeare, is that you have to do the imaginary work. And this is to me, the fundamental argument of why you should read literature is that it makes, it builds your imagination and makes your imagination a place to go visit and enjoy. And I feel my sense is that so many people don't have rich imaginations, not because they're not born with it, but because they don't exercise it and try it. That's my sense.
It's something great for kids, right?
Especially kids.
I think kids reading some of these words aloud are great because we spoon feed imagination, right? Yeah. They're watching video games. Everything's extremely literal. I mean, I just think the best image of a kid is lying out on grass, looking up at the clouds.
Yeah, I agree.
That we just don't have that anymore. When I'm talking to my kids on Zoom, I'll say, well, you're outside today. Did you run around today? There's just not enough of that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So this, I did want to talk about this scene though. Do you have any insight? So this is where you said, she talks about him becoming mad, and she does say this. So like,
stop thinking like this.
Yeah. Stop thinking like this.
And we said this to somebody, like, stop. Oh,
that's a good point. Yeah. So like, I did want to, end our talk about making it relevant to our lives. And I think because literature is very relevant to how we live our lives, especially great literature has a lot of applications. And I think what you see with Macbeth and with Lady Macbeth is, Macbeth starts off as this, great warrior. It seems like he's a little uncertain, but once he starts to think, however it gets planted, and then we could debate how it gets planted. Once he starts to think that this thing is possible for him, this impossible achievement that, some people might call it like his great ambition. Once it starts to get planted in there, one is very hard to dislodge. And then once he gets pushed into murder, there is a psychological switch that happens in him where he's now committed to the act, right? He's committed to this whole thing. And there's a kind of inevitability that he's going to go mad and he's going to become the tyrant. It's a logical next step. So it's very real in that sense that if you do a bad deed like this, even if it's not murder, even if people don't find out, there is a sense where and these types of things, you're going to go mad. And to me, like when Lady Macbeth kind of pushes him in terms of, he's too kind, his nature's not too kind. By the end of it, I see her as being terrified of him in a sense and his madness. And are you a man? She says that, when he starts seeing ghosts of Banquo. And then of course she's also going mad, but I think she doesn't realize the forces she's unleashed psychologically when she's participated, instead of saying, no, don't do this. If he does not give you the kingship which he ends up not giving it to Macbeth, then just, be happy with your new thanehood. You have a new land to take care of. She doesn't say that. So anyway, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I don't, but I want to drive us a little bit toward the end. So
okay.
Spoiler-ish.
Sure.
That fight between Macduff and Macbeth, and you brought it up in the beginning about, we get the final omen is, well, you don't have to worry, buddy, until Dunsinane Woods come to the castle.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are you talking about? It's like,
how can woods?
The woods move. The woods are not going to move. I'm good.
Yeah.
Or you won't be killed except by somebody if they're not a woman born, right? So they give them all these ambiguous omens, and then the omens start to come true.
Yep.
And in fact, even when Macduff says, "I was from my mother's womb untimely ripped," so I had a cesarean birth.
Yeah.
So that means I wasn't born of woman in the normal way. Macbeth still says, "Fight on."
Yeah.
And that's the heroic moment of Macbeth. So even though he dies fighting, and that's back to the hero of the battlefield, I think. So that's part of why I like him and care about him, and I love the play.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a warning, and part of the problem with Macbeth, of course, is the tyranny, and this is why it's hard for us to like him at all. this is the challenge. Like I have that line that I love, the blow wind come, what is it? Come rack. Yeah. We will, at least we'll die with harness on our back, and so I like that line because of what you're saying. It's that kind of bravery till the end, but he's a tyrant, man. He murders kids, right? He has all these, he has people scared. He kills whoever he thinks necessary. He hires murderers, or he does the deed himself. There's all these horrible things that he does. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, there are heroic aspects to his nature that just, the way that the Fassbender portrayal did this is, I think they did it in the way you're like, it seemed like he was almost having PTSD in a sense. And that's kind of what, because they kept doing flashbacks of the war that he just fought in. And that is kind of what pushed him into that next murder. Like when the famous dagger scene where it's like, does he see the dagger? Right. And he says, is this do I see this dagger? And we, the audience, don't know. In Fassbender's version, or the version with Fassbender, it has a character that was killed on the battle scene holding the dagger hilt first toward him. That's how he experiences that. And so to me, I took that as so that's one interpretation of how to do that scene.
Well, Shakespeare has that line, is it a dagger of the mind?
Yes.
So Shakespeare, gives that to you as an actor and as an audience.
And I think this is part of what makes it relevant to us is we're not probably going to be kings of Scotland or queens of Scotland. we more than likely. But we can have, and I don't remember what play this comes. It's another play where it says, I think it's Othello, poison in the ear, right? And in this case, it's a dagger in the mind. The poison in the ear in Othello is Iago's envy or whatever. Here, the dagger in the mind, which are words, is an omen. And it's the thought and ambition of getting this action or this thing of kingship. And that, I think, to me is very relevant, even if you're not going to be a king, because you hear all the time of very wealthy people doing anything to get wealth, right? And that is the issue, is like, what, obviously murder is extreme, though that happens too. There's like a whole TV channel, I don't know what it's called, but my mom loves it, which is all these murder mysteries, and they're real true crime stories, and a lot of them are like, killing somebody for a little bit of extra money or whatever. But yeah, so to me, like, it's not, you can make it as a metaphor, the murder part, and just think a bad deed that you're doing, it will not sit with you. Psychologically, it will slowly destroy you from within. You did it.
Fake reality in any way you fake reality.
Exactly.
Do Match.com and you make believe that you're somebody that you're really not.
Yeah.
And then you find somebody you really like, and now it's like, now what?
Yeah.
And lies just beget lies, and Shakespeare was famous for that idea of rumor, of putting ideas in your mind. The more you play with them, the more they become destructive.
Yeah. And so I think like that's one reason to read this, and we'll wrap up here. But I think that is so powerful to, you're putting it in terms of you can't fake reality. And that's true. There's an external reason why you can't fake reality, because other people will know it. Like Malcolm, the son of Duncan, he will learn the truth and uncover it. So or the Match.com, the person will eventually learn that you were not an NFL player, even if you tell them that. And so that's one part of the problem of lying and doing these misdeeds. The other part is the inner world, the psychological effects. And that, I think, is why Shakespeare transcends from decent and good playwrights to grand, is he gets both, which is exactly how we experience the world as humans. And this is something that, why I something I learned from Ayn Rand, is that truth is that it's true both ways, that you can't fake reality because other people will learn it, and reality is, and so you'll be bumped up against what is, even though you're saying it's not. And then psychologically, it's not true. and that will destroy you in the end. So any last thoughts on Macbeth and this play?
I just want to say I hope people will take a look at it however they can, whether it's on YouTube or Google it or whatever, and check out austinshakespeare.org.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for checking out Macbeth. Make sure you look up austinshakespeare.org, Ann Ciccolella, and there will be, I know, very soon, some more Shakespeare plays going on in Austin. So thank you guys, and I'll see you next time.